Sessions. This is Rick, and this is your seat at the table. I'm going to talk about initiative. I'm looking at, as I sit back occasionally and I go through things and I reflect on certain core rule aspects of most game systems that I've been involved in. And initiative is a very key piece of the crunch. And there's a lot of people who have different views on this and how they take on it. And believe it or not, whether you believe it or not, there are various types of initiative. And even if you have a totally story-based table where somebody decides I'm going to do this thing first, and then someone else says, okay, well, I'll do this, you're still using the initiative. It is initiative, and it is a rule. It is a format. It is something to keep in mind, or not, right? Okay, so when I looked it up on the video, or you went on the internet, looked it up, things come up under Reddit and Wikipedia or whatever you want to call it. So there's a couple different things, and one less than common type, which I have used some variant of this called the shot clock, mostly in tabletop wargaming, but it's applicable in a role-playing game situation. It's Syncical, Sylical. It's repeating ticks of time, using the clock face to keep track of giving players a choice on how fast they want to act, but they still have moments. So using the shot clock, I make my moment, click. You make yours, click. He makes his, click, etc. The typical one is considered lines, as it's called, or statistic based, also called statistic based. They say, this is them, not me. You want to get irate at them. The typical, you get irate at them. The typical D&D style. This is where we decide usually at the beginning of an encounter, or maybe already done at the beginning of the session, or already in play permanently in the session, is what character acts in what order. So and so goes and does so and so thing. Now this is where we're doing our line of march or line of progression or what have you. But this is generally our initiative, and so and so is at the front. They're going to react first, unless, of course, mitigating circumstances make that change, where then the GM may, or the story master, narrator, or what have you, may ask you to make a initiative check by tossing a die and adding any modifiers you may have that allow you to get the heads up on something. All right, good old-fashioned die roll. Let's do the die roll. Oh wow, hey, that's an 18, right? So, and then perhaps everybody makes one, and then we play out a line, and we see, okay, the highest goes or the lowest goes, depending on how you play your preferences. So, when we're looking at things in the nature of the beast, where we're in a line, so and so, and then the next guy, and the next guy, and then the dude way in the back, everybody takes their shot. So, we're looking at that's your standard that we're familiar with, right? And then there's something called factions. And the particular author of this Reddit entry was saying this is the rare and simplistic and the easiest that he's encountered for especially for new players who are not familiar with all the extra rules and all the nuances within the rules. Is basically everybody's in a group. So these three characters and these three characters are a faction. They act and function together as much as possible. And then the next group, and then the NPCs, things like this. So it groups the players, the NPCs, etc., in small groups. That allows discussion and planning can take a part. So if your group is first and the next group is second, well, your three can decide what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and so on. And then once you've said, okay, we act, the next, we take whatever that is and deal with it, and then we move to the next faction. And then there's another option called choice that's common in Marvel Marvel heroes or whatever, for example, has in Marvel, for example, each player character picks who has not acted already to go next. Final person picks the person who goes first in the next round. Right? I've played that a few times, and you get some social interaction out of that on occasion too, because it's, who the hell are you picking me for? You know I'm not ready, etc., etc., so on and so forth. So when we talk about initiative, the different types of initiative is not what I'm gearing up here for, right? I'm looking at what's the purpose. The main base and this is my opinion, my understanding for initiative. The base idea is that certain people, certain characters have traits, abilities, magic adjustments, things like this that allow them to react faster when a situation occurs, or to be better prepared and on point, if you will, and to act in a given situation. This also reduces an element of confusion. That's the initial intention, is so everybody acts within a certain parameter, and you can randomly choose. You can just have people act. You know, as I said, Joe decides he's going to shoot his arrow, and Melissa's going to pull a rabbit out of her bag and throw it at the bad guy, right? Well, Joe just made the initiative and he decided to go first, or he just decided to go first. It's just, if you're good with it, that's how you want to play it. Doesn't matter. In a linear game, when everybody sits around the table and we're taking turns, it's a series of turns and rounds, and having some control over who acts in those given turns and rounds in an appropriate manner helps. It also allows us to place out our strategy when it comes to the characters and the player characters and so on and their abilities. So obviously, if you've got some tanks in the mix, you kind of want them up front. They may or may not be the first to act, though, because if you've got an archer or mages in the background, perhaps they're going to fire first, or maybe some other magic users are going to beef up the frontline people by casting preemptive spells and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's always the possibility that the bad guy or the creature gets the drop on the party. And so if everybody's in the line of progression and we roll for an initiative or an initiative check as a whole, the GM is deciding, is allowing the dice to determine. I'm going to roll the dice, and I rolled a 3. I'm going to allow the dice to determine the action. So narrator's not completely dominating the flow of play. The beast is last because the beast rolled poorly. Or if the group rolled the 3 and the beast rolls 11, the beast gets to act on the initiative. And then this plays again into the line of progression, which is part of initiative. So if the beast is going to get to act, he's going to act appropriately. Ideally, if it's a physical attack, it needs to be at the closest point to the group. So he may be preempting the actions of other players because he gets to intervene and act, and then you fall back. So the players after the fact get to act, and then the ones who are preempted fit in between. The creature might have an ability to cast a magic spell or use some kind of use something or have an organic way of projecting something which allow them to target something further back in the line of progression. And there's a lot of discourse and conjecture about the concept of whether initiative is important and whether or not initiative is tied to your line of progression or your party's advance or how your party's laid out. This is important, and it becomes important in many subtle ways. For example, if your party's in a narrow, confined space, and you already determined your initiative, then your your opponent enacts something that causes a fear check, and everybody's forced to make a fear check for their character, or they make a gut check. So in a place where you're choosing to be dice light and rules light, how does your characters react in a situation to this fearsome event or fearsome thing or this fearsome effect coming from this creature? And if somebody that's 3/4 of the way down the line of progression panics and freaks out, perhaps they turn and they run bum rush right into the rest of the party behind them, causing a confusion in the melee and a disruption in the initiative. So suddenly half the party's at a disadvantage, and the party who acted earlier has the initiative to act early, has to continue acting in that manner because that's how their character reacted to the situation. So it plays out in a lot of ways where we don't take into account that everybody's, people are people, and if you get the wrong kind of players together, or the right group with a wrong mindset, they can overanalyze and over discuss and overthink a situation to the point where it's absurd. I've no problem with the party talking options and discussions and things like this, but I prefer doing it in character, not out of character. That's a video for another time. The upsides and downsides for that is that when you're acting in character, because all it means say in character versus out of character response. Right? See, taking notes. So for a possible future video. The idea being in that aspect is that your characters are having this conversation then and there and debating on what they should do and how they should do it. And it should consume time and moments of time and have penalties. So if they're valiantly shouting at each other about how to circle around something, and that's something smarter than the average bear, then maybe, just maybe, that thing's going to get an option of having in-character knowledge because it understands the concept of, you two go over there and I'll go over here, and then we'll all attack together. Perhaps the would-be bear is not going to settle and allow the characters that luxury, as opposed to the characters spending 20 minutes or 30 minutes of table time out of character discussing strategy and tactics that should be applied in character, right? And that's conjecture, once again, and just my opinion of how you want to look at it, how you want to play it out. You have to make that decision, and so on and so forth. So having these things in progression, having a line of progression, having the initiative, and then there's initiative within initiative. And this confuses people quite a bit. What do you mean? I already rolled initiative. No, your initial roll was to determine how quick, savvy, and on point your character is in this given encounter. So you are second place in this line of progression because that's where your roll for initiative ended. Within the line of progression, something's changed, actions happen, consequences play out, and then perhaps we have this another opportunity where we say, hey Joe, what do you want to do? The bugbear already knocked down Fred and Melissa, and is proceeding to chase Dwab there, and he's lumbering right past you, and he's not quite within range, but he appears to be focused on Dwab. You have an opportunity. That's what you call attacks of opportunity, actions of opportunity, but that's also an ask for initiative. Are you going to act? And you give the player the option to make that decision, as in calling it an act of opportunity. So here's a chance. What do you want to do? Or if they don't quite catch on, you say roll initiative, and the player tosses that dice, makes that roll, and fails that initiative check. So they realize the bugbear is at a disadvantage, and that they could have had advantage on it, that they could have had an act of opportunity, but that it's passed them by. They waited too long to react or to act when you give them that situation. So these mechanics, while it seems like they don't have a place and time and et cetera, it's not true. They all have value in their perspective of how we choose to use them. Keeping in mind that it's real easy to sit there and to have everybody sit at the table and make fire to hip motions. Who does what? So does this mean that your bad guys, the foes, are always at the back end? That the characters always get the jump? always get to react first and to do things first, or do you want to have the bad guys tossed in there? I have played the games where I have put everybody in a line of progression based on initiative, including the foes. I've also had places where I put chunks of foes, like a squad, 4 or 5, 3 or 4, or whatever, because I got more foes on the field than I got player characters, and I don't want to be rolling for 25 different things. So I'll break them into squads of 4 or 5 to make it more manageable. But that's because, generally speaking, 4 or 5 of these kobolds should be more than sufficient to act, to be a mild threat to a given player, as opposed to say four or 5 ogres and against a fourth level group of players. So in squad. So there you go. My thoughts on initiative and some basic concepts of variance on initiative and why initiative plays the role that it does and why it is one of those embedded, often underappreciated rules for any type of role-playing game and tabletop game. And that includes war games, right? Because it is the way it is. Anyway, till next time, this is Rick, his crazy notes, his dice, and your seat at the table.